Well, good evening, fellow workers. Welcome to the Labor of Librarianship, Lessons from Library Worker Organizing. My name is Todd Vachon, and I'm the director of the Labor Education Action Research Network at Rutgers University. And I'm really excited to have you all here for this amazing lineup of speakers that we have this evening that you can see around me on the Zoom screen. For those that are not familiar, LEARN is the Educational Extension Division of the Department of Labor Studies and Employment Relations at Rutgers. And we sponsor public programs like this, as well as classes and research that strengthen the community at work, facilitate its organization on a more democratic basis, and address unjustified inequalities of power and wealth in society. So I'd invite you to please like and follow us on your preferred social media platform to stay up to date with all of our offerings, including our classes, custom trainings, and public programs like this. Also want to flag that we have an upcoming new Union Academy, which is a free 6-session online class running this October and November. And it's designed specifically for workers in newly formed unions that do not yet have a first contract. So that's really a great opportunity to get some skills from a lot of our faculty here at Rutgers University. If you're at that stage where you've organized a union and you don't yet have a contract, we're going to go over some basics of labor and employment law, collective bargaining, etc. I'm also excited to be joined and welcome you tonight by my friend and colleague and regular LEARN program instructor, Professor Rebecca Given. Becky, would you like to say a few words? Welcome.
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, I'll just keep this short because I can't wait to hear this discussion that we have ahead of us. But I'm thrilled that we have this panel. It's great to be part of LEARN's programming, and it's great to speak from to hear from such a varied group of people that are doing amazing work in their libraries, where I don't think it's an exaggeration to say libraries, whether public libraries or K-12 higher ed, are under siege in many places, and the people who work in them are under siege. And so there couldn't be a better time to be talking about this. I'm just going to introduce our moderator and then hand things off. I'm really thrilled that tonight Michelle Chen is able to moderate our discussion. Michelle is, I'm thinking, triple, quadruple threat. She's a historian, currently a postdoctoral fellow in labor history at Cornell University. She's also a contributing writer for The Nation and in These Times, and has been published in many places that some of you are probably familiar with. And she's also a host of Dissent's Belabored podcast, which to my mind is a must listen. So we're thrilled that Michelle will moderate our program tonight, and I'm going to hand things over to Michelle. Thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks for that great introduction. Welcome everyone. So tonight we are discussing the labor of librarianship with a panel of veteran library workers and seasoned labor activists. And I think I was asked to moderate this panel as a journalist who's covered academic labor issues for some years, but I come at this from a slightly different perspective as well, because I've worked as an instructor at both private and public university campuses. And in recent years, I've been really struck by how often my undergraduate students often start their college careers not really knowing how to search a library catalog or use an archive. And often that signifies to me how much libraries as institutions can be taken for granted, perhaps not adequately valued, and how the labor of librarians might be overlooked, right, in an age of increasingly digitized communications. But I also saw during the pandemic that there was this massive social gap that was created in the intellectual and community life of New York City when the libraries at the City University of New York, where I taught, as well as the city's branch libraries, were shuttered for a long time. And more recently, we've seen libraries in the headlines as the contested ground of a raging culture war over what kinds of books children should be allowed or encouraged to read. So in all of these contexts, it's clear that libraries as institutions are both extremely vital as well as extremely vulnerable to the cultural and political exigencies that we're living through. But even when the public is paying attention to debates on library funding or programming, I think the experience of librarians at work is often not really foregrounded as a critical component of that system, nor are the struggles of library workers as they're working to ensure that their working conditions are fair and that they can serve their communities in a way that is just and equitable. So we're going to explore that tonight, hopefully. So I'm going to just introduce the panelists now. Meredith Kahn is the librarian for gender and sexuality studies at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. They serve in a leadership role for Leo GLAM, that's AFT Michigan Local 6244. It's a union of librarians, archivists, and curators across all 3 of the UMich campuses. And in the last year, Meredith has been a member of the union's bargaining team, organizing committee, and communications committee. Andrea Lemoynes is an adult/teen librarian at the Free Library of Philadelphia. She's also the founder of Concerned Black Workers at the Free Library and a member of ASME District Council 47, Local 2187. And finally, Michael Torres is president of ASME Local 3395. That's Indie Library Workers, and he's a 3rd generation of United Steelworkers Local 1010, 1011, Indiana Harbor. So to start, I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves beyond what I just told the audience. Talk a bit about the work that you've been doing and the campaigns that you've been involved with, and anything else you want us to know about your organizing work to start off with. So maybe we'll start in alphabetical order. We'll go to Meredith first.
Thanks, Michelle. So if I can give just sort of a brief introduction to the last 2 years of what we did with Leo GLAM. So we represent librarians, archivists, and curators at the University of Michigan across all 3 University of Michigan campuses. And we exist thanks to a neutrality policy that the regents of the University of Michigan approved in the summer of 2020. So from start to finish, from that policy until we ratified our contract was almost 2 years to the day. So that policy was passed by the regents in the summer of 2020, and pretty quickly after that, a small number of us got together and started talking about organizing. Like many of us, the summer of 2020 in libraries was the time to think about, especially at academic institutions, what the fall would look like. And I think a lot of us had some concerns about what the fall would look like. We formed an organizing committee that represented librarians, archivists, and curators, and our members across all 3 campuses. And we started talking to our colleagues. And by February of 2021, we were ready to go public with our campaign because we had talked to a majority of our colleagues, and we knew that we had support from a majority of our colleagues. So we actually went public with our campaign the same week that our library on the Ann Arbor campus was in the New York Times because of venomous spiders being found in the basement. So that's something that we'll probably laugh about forever. Just sort of a little joke that these things happened at the same time. But so in March of 2021, we started the card check process because under neutrality, we didn't have to undergo an election. All we had to do was card check, which made it much easier. And by May of 2021, we had reached majority and actually exceeded majority. In July of 2021, we achieved voluntary recognition by the University of Michigan, and we were the first new bargaining unit on the University of Michigan campuses outside of the health system to be recognized under the voluntary recognition policy. In the fall of 2021, we started preparing for bargaining, and we had a bargaining survey. And again, we talked to all of our members. That's about 175 people across those 3 campuses, many of whom are in Ann Arbor and many of whom are librarians, but significant portions are also archivists and curators and folks in Flint and Dearborn, which is where our other campuses are located. We started bargaining in December of 2021. And in February of 2022, we had gotten all of our proposals across the table, as had management side of the table. And in July, late July, we actually reached a full tentative agreement and we ratified our contract on July 29th. And the financial aspects of our contract actually went into effect on September 1. And I think the thing that I am really most proud of is that we built a coalition that included all three of our campuses, that included all three of the types of employees that are part of our bargaining unit. And we made real material gains, both for our members, but also gains that will help our colleagues, the lecturers, in their bargaining in 2023, because we elected to join a union with lecturers because we are fellow non-tenure track faculty. So we can talk more about contract wins and the details of that, but that's in a nutshell how things happened at the University of Michigan.
Great, and congratulations. Andrea?
Thanks. Hey, everyone. I'm Andrea Lemoynes. I work for the Free Library of Philadelphia. I'm here because I organize Concerned Black Workers. You can Google us. There's quite a bit online about what we did. So a little bit about me. I have been a union community organizer for over, oh my gosh, like 12 years now, mostly organizing Black and Brown workers. Within unions, because oppression exists in every institution, just to make sure that Black and Brown workers' voices are heard. So when I started working for the Free Library of Philadelphia, I heard about issues from the administration of really low pay for Black workers specifically, really high workloads for Black workers specifically, and also an administration that ignored any complaints about racism, homophobia, the intersection of all those things. And what really spurned it was the summer of 2020, when we had an administration who was writing, that they supported Black Lives Matter. We knew that wasn't true. All the staff knew that wasn't true. We had an administration that was definitely all lives mattered, and they lied because, it looks good. Yes, what you put for a public institution, that's what you put out. And so I called my fellow Black workers at the library. At the time, I was not a member of the union. But a lot of my coworkers were, and I called them and I said, hey, we're organizing Black workers in the system to make change. Long story short, we did. We actually were able to push out our old executive director within a month and a half of actually writing an open letter that you can also Google and find online. We got a lot of community support. We are one of the largest public library systems in the nation, and several major authors, including Colson Whitehead, actually canceled an event in support of us. And our movement went national. So I would say there's been a lot going on since then. It's been 2 years, but our biggest wins we actually were able to get, this is Philadelphia, mind you, Philadelphia, a very Black and brown city. We just got our first Black executive director in 2022, Kelly Richards. I'm very excited for him. He's been wonderful. And also we were able to finally get, after a public library had been defunded by our previous administration for about 10 years, we were able to get a $13 million increase in our budget this year because of all the work that we did. Really, speaking truth to power, organizing, Black-led organizing did the work. And I'm just really excited to be here and talk to people about the work that we did, learn from you all, and actually talk about how you can work around your unions when your unions aren't really working for you. For instance, there have been a lot of complaints about racism in the workplace, but a lot of unions really talk about pay, right? They really focus on pay, they really focus on job placement. They don't really focus on the culture in the workplace. And I think a lot of librarians work in a really toxic workplace. And I'd love to talk about that more with everyone here tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, great. And Michael. Oh, unmute yourself, Michael.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Torres. I am a president of ASME Local 3395, representing Indianapolis Public Library workers. Our campaign, our organization, our union came about in 2006, and we had 2 years of organizing, and which was a lot of informational pickets, attending board meetings, getting public support, getting counselors and people engaged in the fight. And then finally in 2008, we had an election, we won the election, and we spent about a year writing our first contract. So we've been kind of established for a while, and we've been through 2 CEOs already. But one of the best things I think it fits me is because I've lived in a steel worker background. Unions were always part of my family. My grandfather was a steward. My father was a steward. So I grew up in the history of still working in unions. So when we started talking about organizing at the library, I was right there. And I'm one of two people who are were in the original organizing group that are still at the library. So we had a pretty good fights, and since we've been established now, what I enjoy more is that we've kind of expanded our power. As Andrea was speaking, it's gone more to just policy raises and everything. At this point, our big fight right now is our CEO search. We have challenged the company that was hired to get us or a new CEO. So we've challenged that. And we're really in a head-to-head fight right now, and we're about to go public with it because we're not agreeing with the system or the process, and we're not really being allowed to be part of the process right now. So unions, we're showing up at meetings, we're writing counselors, we're talking to everybody, and we're almost at this point where we're about to write a petition and really stretching our power right now. So all these years we've kind of gained all that power, and we're really using it and stretching it now. So that's what keeps me going at work and everything.
Great. Thank you for sharing those insights about your workplace organizing. So I'm going to jump into something a little more philosophical now.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about the term vocational awe, which for those who don't know, and I also didn't know before I started preparing for this panel, when we refer to vocational awe in the field of librarianship, we're referring to the concept of one's work as a kind of sacred calling and a sort of approach to the workplace that treats the institution as somewhat sacred and untouchable. So with that concept in mind, can you talk about how vocational awe colors your organizing work and any challenges that it poses in your quest to build a stronger union and engage your fellow coworkers? Anyone?
Well, okay. Well, I'll start off. One of the things that I think really has been really affecting us, and I know a lot of people in public libraries or libraries are experiences, and that's our security. When we talk about vocation awe, how we're kind of taking on the responsibility of being security at a lot of our branches at this point. And it's just another thing that's been added on to our other duties and everything. And so we're exhausted with that. So we have an outside security company that we hire and we employ. But at this point, now we are going to get our own security. The security is going to be our staff. So I think it's going to be I think it's going to take away that responsibility of us having to be the one who goes to, who deals with the immediate issues that are happening at the library and everything. So seeing that, they're taking that away, we've made changes to that, and we've asked for those changes, and we've got to this point where it's being taken away from us now. That's just one example of responsibility I thought that was causing us a lot of headaches and a lot of dread and being responsible for that issue. So.
Anyone else?
Oh, go ahead, Meredith.
Yeah, I could speak to this from an academic library context. So I think the way that vocational awe plays into this is that we often had to have a lot of conversations early on with our colleagues to remind them that they are workers, that to be an academic and to work in the academy is not special and different, and it doesn't make you any less deserving of protections. And getting folks to recognize that and internalize that was a challenge. And thankfully, it's less of a challenge now that we've gotten through bargaining, but definitely it was a huge hurdle in some of our early one-on-one organizing conversations.
Yeah, and I just want to add to what Meredith and Michael both said. I very much agree with that. Vocational awe has people taking on a larger workload than they should, like not seeing their job as a job, but seeing it as like a lifestyle choice. And I think a lot of librarians like define themselves as being a librarian, and it's a lifestyle choice. And so people, you know, the community deserves so much. We need to give, and like support, and to the point where they burn out. And also, I think that really contributes to the low pay in the field, that people aren't saying like, my work is valued, all our work is valued, and this is the work that I do. So people feel like this kind of bad, like, you know, I should be doing all these things, instead of being like, no, like you should also have a life and hang out with your family and go on vacation and do all those things. So I think a lot of it too is, yeah, like what Meredith said, especially about like, we're workers, like you need to go on a vacation. Like I know our library gets a lot of pushback from community, from having like, you know, we're not open that much. We have very low staffing right now. But you know something, if a library has to close because someone needs to go on vacation because they've been working for 1.5 years during the pandemic, I think it should close. Like if we don't have enough staff, like people need to take vacation, people need to take care of their sick children, people got to take care of themselves. So really seeing ourselves as workers and not this is like some calling, I think is a larger like cultural issue like in the field that we really need to address. And I'm hoping that conversations like this begin to address that issue.
Just because you're passionate about your work doesn't mean you should feel embarrassed about demanding demanding a fair wage. You mentioned the pandemic. I was wondering if each of you could talk about how it has been organizing or engaging in the bargaining process during the pandemic. Has you know, telework complicated things? How have you been keeping in touch with your membership, and what are some of the challenges and how did you overcome them?
Oh, I'll say for me, in this weird way, it made it easier to organize because so many of us were on Zoom and we're on our phones and texting, and you know, for a while there, we were on lockdown, so people were working from home. So it was easy for, you know, on my lunch break to make calls and text, or like, you know, in the morning to make calls and texts, or even, you know, just sometimes, you know, take your long lunch break, you go to the grocery store. Like I remember, I actually saw a coworker at a grocery store once, and I told him I wanted to start Concerned Black Workers, and he's like, I'm in. Like it actually made it, because we were so like dependent on technology at that point, it definitely made it easier. Where in the workplace, you know, I'd be trying to like, you know, let's go get some coffee, or let's go over here, let's talk, like I'll constantly worrying about the boss over my shoulder, where the pandemic, I think, actually made it quite a bit easier to organize.
I'll have to agree, because during the pandemic, there were so many unknowns, and we had bosses who were trying to make decisions for everybody. And as a union, we were organized enough to have an impact and have people constantly adding their feedback and saying, no, challenging, no, we don't want to open too early. We don't want to open all day. We want, you know, limited times, all those types of things. We had actually had some fight back with, and we actually made some leadway in our fights with them. And one of the, and I'd hate to say this, but the pandemic was actually a I apologize for that, was actually a good time. I'll come back to you guys, sorry.
I'll say we bargained an entire contract over Zoom, which made some things easier. You know, the mechanics of going from caucus to the bargaining room, you're just going from Zoom to Zoom. So you can really quickly switch between them. Also, because we represent members across 3 different geographic locations, Ann Arbor, Flint, and Dearborn, it actually made it really easy for people to participate no matter what campus they were on and no matter where they worked, you know, in a particular library or museum or gallery. And so the mechanics of it were easier in that way. And it was, you know, we could get really good attendance numbers for general membership meetings because it was just another Zoom meeting. But we did, you know, some of our one-on-one conversations were harder because as much as Zoom in a one-on-one situation does replicate a lot of that experience of talking to someone. Sometimes it would have been more effective to make an ask if you were actually in person. And we're kind of discovering that now, you know, that we're all kind of back in person for the most part in many of our work locations. But bargaining a contract, it's kind of hard. I can't imagine doing it in person now because we did the whole thing on Zoom. Like, we would be in a physical location and everyone would have lots of paper in front of them. Like, how would that work?
Like when you have to actually walk from one room to the other. So, right, with that in mind, can each of you talk about any experiences that you had with union busting or retaliation you experienced from your employer during your campaigns over the last couple of years, or any other ways in which, you know, oppressive or toxic workplace practices surfaced in your work?
I'll try this again. One of the benefits of organizing and bringing in community people was that they knew who our bosses were, and they had relationships with them. So actually, I thought, to me, being an organizer was kind of a protection for me, because, you know, they wouldn't dare do anything to me or retaliate against me because it would be too obvious, and it would be, you know, too obvious that someone could say, yeah, well, that's why they're doing it. So we were lucky in the sense we didn't have at that time a director who was pushing against us. So, but when we did have a CEO, we changed CEO, who was a former councilwoman who had relationships already with political people in the city. She did not like when we challenged her. So what started happening is that we would always be forced into meetings with them. You know, they'd always call for meetings, you know, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And a lot of gaslighting. A lot of that was happening, and trying to make us think that, like, we were doing something wrong, or we weren't seeing things the way they were. So that was the worst about the retaliation for us.
Andrea?
I can say that because we organized and bargained a contract under an official neutrality policy, we were actually very lucky. We faced very little retaliation, very little sort of effort on behalf of the employer to challenge us. And I credit management with that, and our employer. They stuck to the neutrality policy. All the way down to, you know, we didn't really have problems with middle managers going rogue very much. It really made that early organizing phase go quite smoothly. There were other bumps along the way, but we really didn't face much hostility from the employer or from management. It changed a bit once we got to bargaining. Things got a little more heated. But still, throughout that process, the employer and management were actually very well behaved, and I am actually thankful for that, because it meant that we didn't have to face some of the shenanigans that some of our colleagues in public libraries, in the private sector, and even in some academic institutions. I'll call to your attention our colleagues at the Eastern Michigan University, which is just down the road in Ypsi. The faculty union there, the full-time faculty union, is currently on strike. And the administration of Eastern Michigan University is definitely up to shenanigans. And so I feel lucky that we didn't have to go through any of that ourselves.
Yeah, for ours is a little bit different too. So when I and my coworkers organized in the summer of 2020, most of the coworkers were unionized. Some of us weren't, because we were more like I formed more of a Black caucus, like, you know, caucuses within a union. So it was an odd thing because Philly's a very union city, and, you know, unions have been here for a long time. So our pushback was very personal. So for instance, as many of you know, boards of trustees are all involved up in your public library system. They have a lot of power, a lot of say-so. And so white leadership on our boards actually had Black members of the board try and call Black staff and tell us that we were being rude. They were never going to get rid of our executive director, that we should, have a meeting and come down and be like, more civil. And that was really, really dirty. Like they played really dirty, like the reverse race card, like the reverse tokenism. I never got those calls, but quite a few members of our group got those calls. Especially from, so we have two boards. We have a foundation, which that's what I used to work for. I know most organizations, even academic, have like a fundraising part. The foundation and they have an executive board, and there's an executive board for the public library system. And there was a Black board member of the foundation. They definitely were heavy on about calling our staff. Calling Black staff and complaining about what was going on. So it got really nasty, really personal. Quite a few board members have actually left since we won. Hello, I'm sitting here, we won. But yeah, there was a lot of pushback, and it was a nasty, nasty fight, and it was worth every moment. So our library is a million times better compared in so many ways. Yes, we're still struggling. Everyone's a mess right now with the pandemic, but yeah, it was a pretty nasty fight.
I'm curious, in forming the Black Caucus, was there any resistance or any barriers you ran up against within the union?
Something? I heard some things from other members of Concerned Black Workers. Like I said, I wasn't a member of the union at the time, but they told me that the union wasn't really interested. So I will say this, my district council, they just stayed out of our way. There was really nothing there. I think because I'm supposed to say, this is me personally. Number one, y'all always unionize. Always, I will always sign a union card my entire life, always sign one. A union is just the beginning. It's just the start. Like there's so many cultural issues, so many institutional systemic issues that need to be addressed in order to actually change like the culture of your workplace. So yeah, so AFSCME just kind of stayed out of our way, which I'm glad about, because that's the fight I didn't want. I didn't want to fight with my own union. You know what I'm talking about? I really I just prayed. I'm like, please just be quiet and stay over there, just so we can get our work done and move on. So yeah, so I admit like they weren't supportive, but they also didn't get in our way. They just stayed neutral. They just let staff fight. And I will also want to say this, we had a lot of amazing co-conspirators, non-Black co-conspirators. Like Concerned Black Workers led the fight, but this was an entire staff fight. And because it was an entire staff fight, I think our district council knew to just like be quiet and stay out of the way.
Wise choice.
Yes, it was a wise choice.
That kind of is a good segue into my next question. What role have library unions played in making library workplaces more inclusive and equitable, both for library workers as well as patrons? What role, if any, I should say?
I can speak to that a little bit. So our union represents librarians, archivists, and curators. And as many people know, there are salary surveys in particularly academic libraries that demonstrate salary disparities based on race and gender, also by institution type and geography. There are similar surveys for archivists. And I think it was 2019 for museum curators, there was a thing that happened where people started crowdsourcing their salaries in museums. They were sharing a Google Doc spreadsheet. And so there's sort of an established known problem with salary equity in libraries, archives, and museums. And something that the way that we approached our salary negotiations is that we knew that it was a first contract and we could make some significant gains for our membership, but we wouldn't fix all of our salary issues. And so we really tried to make as much progress as we could. And we focused on bringing up the salaries of some of our lowest paid workers, which included our colleagues on the Flint campus, which has been historically under-resourced compared to our other campuses. And surprisingly enough, our curator colleagues, our art museum curators, were among some of the lowest paid of our colleagues. So the largest raise in the first year of our contract, actually, it's 27%. And it's going to one of our art museum curators who started her job as an unpaid volunteer years ago. And so she carried with her that history of sort of an unfair salary up until that moment. And the amount of the raise that she got really reflects how underpaid she was compared to her colleagues. The structure of our salary proposal was incredibly complicated. We like to joke that we made such huge gains by just confusing and tiring out management. We were trading increasingly complicated spreadsheets with formulas that they didn't understand. But ultimately, it resulted in a 17% increase in our salaries overall over the 3 years of the contract, which includes guaranteed annual increases in every year of the contract, all 3 years for every member. It includes equity adjustments based on years of service. And we know that this is an imperfect measure for addressing equity, but it was one way that we could maximize the amount of money that we could get from the employer to raise those lowest salaries. We also brought up the minimum salaries for all ranks in our bargaining unit so that those minimum salaries, they're actually going to affect Flint and Dearborn much more than they'll affect most of the Ann Arbor campus, but we knew that going in. So it was really about sort of bringing up those lowest paid salaries. We imagine that in our subsequent contract campaigns, we'll probably have to do some work on compression and inequity by race and gender. So that's something that we are already thinking about for next time.
I will build on the compression issue. As far as equity for salaries, for years, we were on a pay for performance structure. And as you know, pay for performance is so favored to all the administrators and whoever they like. So it ended up being that a lot of the administrators and the friends of the CEO and all those people were getting like above raises than what everybody was getting. So we saw that happen a couple of times. And so the union started having discussions about compression, and which we had been fighting for all the time. So I believe we actually pushed to get pay for performance taken out. So we no longer have that part as our evaluation, and we concentrated on compression. And for the last two salary studies that we have, compression was the focus. And we have also, as Meredith had mentioned, we have also brought up our minimum wage, because the city did also a minimum for their city workers, which was $13 an hour, but we went beyond that. We went up to 15. But now we still have one group of workers, which is our pages, who are still under the $15 minimum, the wage that everybody else is making. So now we're in that fight with them. And we're having discussions with our CEO, and we really believe that this is the opportunity that at this point, I believe they're really considering moving up those pages to where everybody is at a minimum of $15. So, you know, the union fought to take away pay for performance that favored raises to those people, and we concentrate on compression, and now we're building our case to help the pages, which we don't represent, but we are still helping them, you know, to get to that point to better their salaries and everything. So it's been about salaries.
Yeah, for us, I would say the work that Concerned Black Workers did really built on the previous work that the union had been working on. I think really it's like having union protection is emboldens you, you know, like you can really push for so many other things because you have that protection. But with Concerned Black Workers, the work of the Black Caucus really, we've all seen how it's diversified and really helped get our library really focused on equity and inclusion in a very serious way. For instance, you know, when our executive director, our old one, when she left, she was a white woman. A lot of white people left with her of their own choosing. We now have a Black male who's a librarian, which is so unheard of. There's still a few Black men in librarianship. It's so sad, but We now have a Black man who is the director of our organization. He is now like promoting internally Black and brown workers who have just, I think really been unappreciated by the previous administration, people who've worked in the field for years, who have so much experience, who are so community focused, who are such amazing professionals. And it's really good for staff for us to see a leadership that looks like our city. So for our first time in probably in decades at the Free Library, at least 12 years, we now see an administration that looks like our city. And I think that's the work that organizing does, right? Like you can actually really culturally change your workplace. And I think our patrons deserve that. Like our communities deserve a library that looks like them and thinks like them and feels like them and can relate to their lived experiences in our city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now I'm going to sort of pivot a little bit to maybe some of the logistical challenges that your work entails now. So, one of the biggest challenges, as well as opportunities that libraries have grappled with over the last couple of years or last maybe few decades, is the advancement of digital technology. So I'm curious as to how digitization, the expanding access to massive amounts of information online, how all that in the information age has kind of complicated the work of librarianship, and also complicated maybe how that labor is valued, and how have you responded to that in terms of your organizing? And has the advancement of technology enhanced your organizing by that same token? So.
I'll say the advancement of technology has really helped with organizing. I remember I started organizing like in 2010, I won't believe. My first organizing job was 2009, 2010. And yeah, there was social media, and yes, I had I was texting on my phone, but it's not the same. There's just so many ways to reach people now, and so many ways to instantly share messages with large groups. Library Twitter is a thing. It's a life within itself. I just think about all the apps that I have on my phone about, sharing information. Let's be real too, organizing, sharing resources, sharing articles. Honestly, too, real grassroots organizing, sending money. There's just so many ways, you have a phone in your hand and there's so many ways to share and get accurate information. I will say this, I haven't worked in libraries long. I think I've been to the Free Library 4 or 5 years. Unfortunately for us, our previous director didn't think technology in public libraries was really important. Again, they weren't a librarian, they were hired. They had a library degree, but they never worked in libraries. They didn't really value it. So unfortunately, our library is really behind right now on technology. I think our staff does an amazing job of supporting the technological needs of our patrons and of our community right now, but I think this is nationally too. I think nationally, I can't speak for but for public libraries, I think with cuts in funding, especially with the funding of public libraries, keeping up with technology has been a real struggle. Funding is such a struggle to buy and upkeep with technology. So I'd love to hear what Meredith and Michael have to say, but the Free Library, because of administration and because of cutbacks previously, we are so behind. We are not where we should be.
Well, what I would say about technology, as far as it being with the community, it's been pushed more so in our public library, which I've always had an issue with, only because, again, it's an equity issue. Not everybody has access to devices that they can read books and do these things. And it's always been an issue with me. And the fact that I'm not seeing a whole lot of new books or materials coming in, I'm seeing that there seem to be more concentrating on ebooks and those resources, which not everybody, again, could use or has access to. So that's always been a concern of mine. But as far as organizing, it's enhanced it, because as Meredith, I believe, said earlier, having these Zoom one-on-one meetings with new staff has been a blessing, only because when they go to new staff orientation, they're just bombarded with so much information that by the time we get to them, they don't care. And unless they're there specifically and they're already union conscious, that they're ready, to hear about it and everything. So that's been a plus for us. And I really enjoy that more so, because I learned more about our new coming members. I actually do new staff orientation. So that's been a plus for us. But as far as technology for e-resources and spending money on that, there seems to be building up this whole e-collection, and it's always been an issue with me with people who don't have access, and that is a big equity issue for me.
Yeah, I think from an academic library perspective, I'll answer this question two ways. So I think the way that increasing reliance on digital technologies and electronic resources affects the labor aspect of this is that it's not any easier to do technical services or resource management with electronic resources than it is with print. In fact, it's just as hard. You need just as many people to do it. So from a labor perspective, in an academic library or archive, as we see our technical services staff shrinking over time, the folks who are left are effectively expected to do more with less, and that is frustrating. From an organizing side of things, I will say that something that is striking is that the most important tool in unions is that one-on-one organizing conversation. And that has not changed. And so if you look at pamphlets for organizing steelworkers from the 1920s, all the same tips apply. It's the same conversations. It's, getting to know your colleague, hearing about their concerns, and ending it with an ask, making an ask at the end of that. And that is the same framework that was used 100 years ago. It's the same framework we use now. It's just sometimes we have these conversations through as two-dimensional electrons on a screen instead, pixels, instead of as corporeal beings in the world.
Thanks. It's so interesting to see how libraries struggle both with technology moving too fast beyond what patrons can handle, and also being behind technologically in some ways. So interesting kind of paradox there. Another kind of contemporary question is, what are library unions doing in the face of the political pressures that have been swirling around libraries? We've all probably heard about the crackdowns on libraries and book banning and other controversies that libraries have gotten sort of caught in the crosshairs of regarding content for the LGBTQ community, content on race, other things like that. So first of all, have any of you encountered this in your workplace or had colleagues who have faced some of these pressures? And in general, what are library unions doing, and maybe what should they be doing that they aren't doing right now?
Well, I will say we had opened a new branch in the south part of Indianapolis almost a year ago. And one of our big displays was our LGBTQ collection. So there was a Facebook page started for a couple that lived on that side of town that started raging about, we're exposing our kids to all these books and these book covers and everything. So it blew up pretty fast and pretty quick. So everybody who worked at the library was kind of ganging in and fighting back with them. And so what we ended up doing even more was putting even more mobile book carts together in all our branches, not just that branch too. So, and we have an LGBTQ committee who was pretty vocal, and as well as our collection director who was attending these sessions and paying attention to State House rules that were banning books, as well as challenging books as well. So we fought back, and we fought back by exposing more, putting out more. And so that's it, they kind of quieted down too. So, and it really never was an issue with us until that incident started with the new branch. But it really made us aware that yes, we're doing the right thing by putting more out there.
I don't know how it actually works in academic libraries, but Meredith, has there been sort of a union response or?
So I have to say that I work at a very wealthy institution in a very liberal town. I work at a place that has a healthy collections budget. I think my colleagues in public libraries actually have much more to say about this than I could in any meaningful way. And I think this is this is what it is to work for one of the wealthiest public institutions in North America. I feel relatively safe in the work that I do. I'm actually the librarian for gender and sexuality studies, so I'm buying the content that in some places is being challenged, and we're just not seeing that as a problem at my institution. But I recognize that is specific to my institution, and it is not a generalizable phenomenon. It's certainly something that as a librarian for gender and sexuality studies, I am paying attention to, and my colleagues who are librarians who work in that subject area are also paying attention to elsewhere. We've got cases of this in the state of Michigan, but it's certainly not something it's not something I am personally facing in my job on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, this actually reminds me a bit of, the Brooklyn Public Library actually made their collections available to anyone all across the country, so that anyone who is facing book bans or anything like that in their own community could have access. So yeah, maybe more libraries will end up having to do that if you happen to be, privileged enough to have a pretty secure library collection. But Andrea?
Yeah, I'm sure we get challenges because we're a large public library system, but similar to Meredith, I live in Philadelphia. I mean, I don't know if y'all remember the 2020 election, but Philly, we hold it down. Like, we are a very progressive, very Black, brown, queer, all the intersections of all the things kind of city. So in my 5 years working at the library, I have not heard anything about complaints or bans. If anything, it's the opposite. People are just like, I'm trying to make sure that the books are categorized clearly so people know they can find, queer Black, brown romance. I want to make sure people can find that. Like, if anything, it's me trying to make sure that, what people are looking for is findable. Like, I haven't had any issue, so I can't relate. I understand it's a huge issue. I definitely hear it from rural librarians in Pennsylvania. But again, I'm very lucky to work in a very progressive city.
Okay, and I think we're about to move into our Q&A, but before we do that, I just sort of a final lightning round. Does anyone have any closing remarks and or question, do the panelists have questions for each other that they would like to ask if you're curious about your fellow panelists' work experience? Okay, so no closing remarks? If not, I will move on to the Q&A. All right. So the first question we have in the Q&A queue is, can you speak to the issue of librarianship being a feminized profession and how patriarchy affects our labor?
Andrea, do you want to take
Thanks.
this?
I was like, who clicked first? I love that question. It is a huge issue, I think, in labor. Please, everyone, forgive me. There is an article, I can't think of the author or the authors, but there's an article you should definitely look up called, I forgot now. It's a great article talking about how white womanhood is used as a colonialization tool in librarianship. And I want to say it's, Lady Bountiful. Definitely Google it, look it up. I remember it being a free open access article, but it talks about how like white feminization is used, has historically been used by colonizers, English coming over, wealthy folks, as a way to civilize the average person on the street, and how that very much affects us to this day. And I think that very much plays into vocational awe. I'm pretty sure that Fobazi Itar actually talks about that article in their article about vocational awe. And I definitely think that, again, it just adds to, I think that's why there's so much trauma, I think, in library work. I saw a couple of questions where people are talking about library work can be pretty toxic and traumatic. And I think it's because it's seen as this feminine, soft, kind of role. We're supposed to be motherly and be, gentle and welcoming to everyone, instead of being at work and being a worker and having some good boundaries and wanting all of us to be safe in this space. So we're supposed to be warm and welcoming. And I think having that warm and welcoming kind of expectation leads to low pay. Let's be honest, like the feminization leads to low pay. It also leads to, I think, to high levels of trauma in the space. And that's all because, the patriarchy wants us to be these nice little ladies who help you find a dusty book instead of actually being trained researchers that are going to help you actually, become an expert on a certain field that you're interested in. So yeah, I think the patriarchy has a lot to do with a lot of the toxicity in the workplace and low pay.
Yeah, patriarchy and whiteness. Librarianship is an overwhelmingly white profession, as well as archives is also very white. We encountered colleagues during our organizing who they were nice white ladies. I'm a nice white lady. And they, said, well, why would I need a union? I just ask nicely and I get given everything I need. And so it's sort of, it's this like feminized, racialized meritocracy kind of thing that happens in the profession with nice white ladies who feel like, well, I don't need anyone to watch out for me and to make sure I'm being treated fairly because I'm always treated fairly. So I think that's another way that it shows up.
Michael? Oh, unmute.
It's definitely something that we all are experiencing right now, and it's so obvious in our public library system. And right now we have an interim CEO who is so well aware of all these challenges now, and really addressing them openly and everything by making sure everybody is more educating them and on issues and everything. So I think we're headed in a positive way with our new interim CEO, who's really widening everybody's scope about these issues.
All right, next one. Oh, sorry, trying to get to the Q&A. Oh, well, you can talk about the toxic workplace one now. Andrea, you mentioned that libraries can be really toxic workplaces. Yeah, would anyone care to speculate on why libraries can often be really toxic workplaces? I'm sure it's different for every library.
Well, toxic in the respect that things have been going on so long and people haven't mentioned anything, have been just kind of dormant about saying anything. So, but they may appear as toxic as something that we're just raising as far as administration. But I believe the union is engaging so many more people, and we are seeing everybody more willing to come forward. And as far as toxic, the top is toxic as well. Our administrators are a toxic group that, really, you want to talk about trickle down, if they're starting the bad things and doing bad things, it just really trickles down. But our union, I will give my union great credit for addressing our toxic CEO that we just booted out last year. So, and it starts at the top, And if it goes in, and if we have a strong enough union, and that was one of the things that we really organized underneath our toxic CEO, and it really helped organize and build our chapter and everything. So to me, we're learning the better to talk with each other and the union is addressing these issues, and people are coming to the union. That's the one thing I want to mention. People are actually coming to the union instead of trying to go to HR and starting there and seeing what they can do. So I think we're helping a lot in that aspect. We're seeing that as part of our role now.
Anyone else? Andrea? Okay.
Oh, sorry, sorry, I didn't hit the button fast enough. But just to go along with Michael too, I think a lot of it is like this internalized vocational awe, because I've definitely seen our union make some great changes when staff actually file the grievances. You know what I'm talking about? It's like actually getting past that internal, I should just put up with this, or other people put up with it. And, but once, I will honestly, I'll tell you, I love a grievance storm. A grievance storm is like one of my favorite things to do. So y'all have a really toxic, manager, there's some crazy stuff going on. I mean, talk to everyone, like organize your coworkers and be like, all 10 of us are going to file a grievance tomorrow. and drop it. Like, just drop all those grievances, get your stories together, get all your emails together, get your notebook out and have all the details of when your manager said this and they did this. And the union, yes, the union's there to help you out with it. And I've seen such amazing changes that your union can make in your workplace. It's more about, again, I keep going back to what Meredith said, which was so great about us seeing ourselves as workers and knowing that we deserve to be treated well in the workplace. And once we can organize each other and get past this, nice lady, whatever-ish foolishness, and actually be like, we all want to be treated better in the workplace. Yeah, the union's there. The union's going to make some great changes and like get you all where you want to
go. So going on the thread of vocational awe, another question is, I would like to know if the panelists have any thoughts about the role that library schools / MLIS programs have in perpetuating vocational awe. In my program, I feel that the pedagogy is quiet or avoidant about addressing the history of labor organizing in libraries, and have even painted unions as detracting from service to the community.
Yeah, so I'm at the University of Michigan, which has an iSchool, and I actually attended, I went to grad school here at the University of Michigan. We didn't have a course about the history of libraries, let alone the history of library workers or labor. So yeah, I think library school curricula that doesn't talk about labor. I think many library schools, you have to take a course on management, but why don't we have to take a course on the history of labor?
And what are some key things organizers should do to make sure that Black and Brown workers feel empowered to join the fight, especially when they are some of the most overworked and underpaid workers in libraries?
Listen, sit down. Like, I can't tell you, I've been active in unions for so long, and I'm going to be very clear. White men don't know when to stop talking and sit down. Just, you want your Black coworkers to feel empowered, to stop talking and sit down. And when your Black coworkers say, let's do this, you say yes. That's exactly how that works. So it's about getting your ego out the way. And again, I want to give a shout out to my non-Black coworkers at the Free Library of Philadelphia, who did just that in the summer of 2020, when the Black coworkers are like, we're going to do this. And they literally said, yes, ma'am. And what do we need to do? And they did it. And that's how we were able to make changes and make cultural change. So yeah, it's actually really easy. It's just white people don't like doing it, but it's that easy.
That's a recurring theme. Given that this is a question from Michael Sullivan, given that staffing decisions usually remain the prerogative of management, are there effective steps that library unions can and have taken to reduce precarity in the form of over-reliance on part-time and temporary jobs? I'm guessing this has a lot to do with the funding situation at your individual library, but yeah, anyone?
Yeah, I can respond to this. So we, in our contract, we have language about the maximum number of term appointments that can exist in the bargaining unit. So we had a small number of people, about 10% of the bargaining unit, that were in term appointments rather than regular appointments. So regular appointments don't have an end date. At the University of Michigan, term appointments, you had a job for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and it might get renewed or it might not. So we got a maximum percentage of the bargaining unit that could be term appointments. We also got the employer to agree to a definition of what was appropriate to use for a term appointment and what wasn't. And as a direct result of our bargaining, we have a number of colleagues who were in term appointments who were notified last week that they are all being moved to regular appointments like the rest of their colleagues. So we're really proud of that. We know that that was a direct result of our organizing efforts and our bargaining efforts. The other things that we ensured were in our contract to address those term appointments, since there will still be term appointments. We got language that ensures that people in term appointments are eligible for promotion just like folks in regular appointments, that they accrue all of the same benefits, that they have the same probationary period, that they're treated the same as colleagues who are in regular appointments. And we got that language in the contract. So that's how you do it.
That's a great tip on, making sure that's in your contract, Meredith. And I want to say that we started subs, hourlies, part-time we had so many at this point, but then it got to the point where we had so many, but no one, we still had staffing issues. So as soon as full-time positions came up, they realized that everybody was wanting to apply for these positions. So they realized that the way to solve this was to lessen the part-time offerings and job postings. So that's again with our new interim CEO, who's kind of changing the thinking of working and hours and everything. So we're kind of in that frame right now of not offering as many part-time, which is a change that our interim CEO is bringing on, because she's experienced, she's from the front lines, and she's seen how it's affecting staffing issues right now. So we don't see too many part-time positions, hardly any, as much as we did before. So I'm glad they're realizing that it's not a good thing for us anymore.
Andrea, you want to chime in? Oh. We have a couple of questions on collective bargaining and the absence thereof. One person says, my library is in a city that doesn't have collective bargaining for public employees, and this has been a huge obstacle to us meeting our goals or gaining recognition by executives. So no real question there, but I guess, what do we do about that? Another, Otter Bowman asks, what advice do you have for workers who are just beginning the bargaining process with a staunchly anti-union administration? So anyone want to take up either of those?
I'd say find all the people who support labor in your community, create relationships with them, invite them to board meetings, invite them to anything that is library related, and just create those relationships, because that's been one of our strongest allies and tools that we've had for over all the years, is creating those relationships and getting those people to come and speak in our behalf, to come and support library workers at public comment and public board meetings and everything. Yes.
Yeah, I can't agree with Michael more. There actually is a term for it. It's called bargaining for the common good. Y'all look it up. It's really about being very transparent with community about what's going on. I used to do it when I was a union organizer back in the day, and we also very much did that with concerned Black workers. We would not have won the fight if it wasn't for community, if it wasn't for all those amazing authors, love to all y'all who canceled in support of us, to local nonprofits, local radio stations, local newspapers who saw what we were going through, who knew what was happening and like supported the plight of workers. Yeah, like that's the only way to like win against a really anti-union boss, is to actually have community involved in the bargaining, come to all the bargaining meetings, share the notes with community, be overly transparent, you have nothing to hide, just share everything and your boss is going to cave.
Sylvia from Ontario, Canada, Mississauga to be exact, asks if Meredith can speak a little bit more about what a neutrality policy is. Maybe they don't have those in Canada. I don't know.
Yeah, so a neutrality policy is when an employer agrees that they will not do things like hire a big fancy union busting law firm. They won't hold captive audience meetings with their employees. At the University of Michigan, our neutrality policy meant that supervisors were told that they were not allowed to express any opinions for or against the union. And supervisors actually did a really good job of just keeping their mouths shut. And so that was really helpful. And that was supervisors, everybody from, the dean or the head of whatever library or archive or museum you worked in, all the way down to your middle manager who's above you. They just weren't allowed to say anything. And a neutrality policy is different than card check. So card check is also a policy that can make it easier to form a union, but for a different reason. So card check is where you do not have to petition for an election. All you have to do is get a majority of employees in the bargaining unit to sign cards, and you can petition for voluntary recognition that way. So at the University of Michigan, we were lucky that we had both neutrality and card check.
Do those exist for all public employees in Michigan, or was? Okay.
No, they do not. So it's actually pretty rare to have any kind of institution that will do both neutrality and card check. So why do we have that at the University of Michigan? Well, the regents of the University of Michigan, who are the folks who are in charge, they're actually elected statewide in the state of Michigan, and currently, the majority of those regents are Democrats who would like to continue to enjoy the support of organized labor in the state of Michigan. So that neutrality policy was the result of many years of lobbying of the regents by organized labor. So we are benefiting from a big amount of work that came before us by many people to push the University of Michigan to be a more labor-friendly institution.
And we have one more, I don't mean to pelt you with questions, but we have one more question from Kay Grigsby. Wants to know where they can find logistical information on how academic libraries can unionize. And also, can a single department of a college unionize? Can you point us to any resources that explain how it's done? I'm sure the process is like fresh in your minds.
It sort of depends on what state you're in, because for public sector workers, things can vary state by state. If you're in a state that is a right to work state, or a state where public sector collective bargaining is protected, things can be much easier for you. If you would like to reach out to me on Twitter, my handle is M_Khan, Kahn. I'm sure I got tagged in all of the tweets about this. I'd be happy to chat about it.
This is, I guess, more of a practical question. My colleagues are getting sick because COVID precautions are practically non-existent. How are unions approaching our health and wellness during COVID? And maybe you can share your experiences about what it was like at the peak of the pandemic, or in the middle of the pandemic as you returned to work at your library.
Well, like everybody, we all started with the public mask, and then mandatory mask. And then as things got better, we didn't require it. And the union fought some of that at some point, but because we had a health director that was guiding our CEO at the time, we really didn't have didn't fight and put too much back, because she always came up with that, while our Marion County Health Director says such and such and such. So that was our guidance with that, and we pushed back some, and we held them up for a while, but we just went along. We had along with that because she had the backing of the Marion County Health Director. So continue to this day, we staff probably are the only ones probably wearing the most masks, but we still offer masks for public, and a lot of public ask for them.
Anyone else? Oh,
Yeah, our union at the Free Library has we have a health and safety committee, and we have union members and stewards on the health and safety committee.
Wonderful.
So I would say, if the people who are having issues with or they feel that their union maybe isn't involved, or they feel like administration isn't listening to them in the workplace, if your workplace is unionized, it's really common to have a health and safety committee. I think pre-COVID, it was OSHA violations, like all that kind of stuff. But with the pandemic, it's really switched over, so that there's hopefully, I'm going to say clear communication about expectations and when things were changing in our libraries, when they were closed, when we opened and we had to get plexiglass. I don't know how that went with y'all, but our library system is large. We have 54 locations. So trying to get plexiglass in all those places, it was such a mess trying to get PPE. One of the first articles about our staff revolt in 2020 was because when staff went back to the workplace, our hand sanitizer and sanitizing wipes were all expired. They expired while we were closed during the pandemic. So that was a huge blow up. But yeah, it really is, and the union really pushed back on that. So I would definitely talk to your union about getting a health and safety committee together and making sure that there's clear communication between you and management about what's happening at your library.
and another question, this also might be academic oriented as well, but maybe others have experience with this too. I feel like many times librarians are a minority constituency within their larger unit bargaining groups, such as in academia with combined faculty/librarian unions, and in public education with combined teacher-librarian unions. As a result, many times librarians have less institutional power. How can librarians that are minority members of a larger bargaining unit get recognition and have a say? So I guess this is about carving out a space for librarians when you're subsumed in a larger bargaining unit.
Yeah, I can speak to this. So Leo Glam, which encompasses librarians, archivists, and curators at the University of Michigan, there's about 175 people in our bargaining unit. We are tiny, we're very small. We joined an existing union rather than starting our own local from scratch. We joined the lecturers union, and they are about, I want to say 1,100 people. So they're much bigger than we are. And that union was formed about 20 years ago. So we chose to join an existing union because lecturers have more political power on our campus than we do. And there's a lot more of them than there are of us. Also, we are both non-tenure track faculty. So lecturers, librarians, archivists, curators, we're non-tenure track faculty. So as much as I get wanting to create a space for librarians, we're still all workers, and we actually have a lot more in common than we think. So in talking to my lecturer colleagues, they had concerns about support for professional development. We have those same concerns. They were concerned about compression in salaries. We had those same concerns. There are some real differences between us. So our lecturer colleagues work 8 months out of the year. We work 12 months. But how do you, as a minority constituency within a union, create space for yourself? run for elections, volunteer for committees, get involved. That's really the only way that you'll be effective in that way. And yeah, forming a caucus, someone mentions that in the chat, that's another way to do it. But I think the more that you talk to your colleagues, the more you will find you have a lot in common.
Any of our public library panelists have anything to say? I guess it doesn't work the same way. Like public libraries are generally standalone. We do have a somewhat related question. What are the logistics and pros/cons of creating library branch unions compared to creating a system-wide union? I'm not sure how that infrastructurally breaks down. Okay. So, and then Dylan Flesh has a question about disability and accessibility focused provisions in collective bargaining agreements. Can you point me to any collective bargaining agreement examples of demands for material support, like paid staff roles or defined budgets, focused on ADA/ACA compliance or similar efforts?
I'll be honest, that is such a good question. And I hope that maybe in the chat that we can get some resources together, because that has come up so many times in the workplace, especially, you know, I work in a very old city and a lot of our buildings are very old and difficult for patrons and staff to get around. ADA accessibility is so important. And also even, you know, I know our union's talking about it. I'm not sure, I'm going to look more into this, but thinking about how we can support staff who are neurodivergent, thinking how we can support staff with different, who are differently, you know, abled, disabled. Like, I know it's a conversation going on now, and I know it's extremely important. And I wish I had answers for that question because it's such a good question. But I see how in the chat people are sharing their contact information and stuff in that Google folder. So hopefully if people have some resources, they can drop it in there for me, a panelist, to look at.
We're all learning.
Yes, we're all learning.
And this is sort of related to organizing in general. Lincoln Cushing asks, what resources do you suggest for keeping up with labor activism issues within libraries and archives? And they mentioned the Journal of the Progressive Librarians Guild. Are there other such sort of national associations or things like that that focus on organizing and mobilizing progressive librarians?
We need to shout out Labor Notes, which is a phenomenal publication and organization and full of resources for organizing for unions. It's not library specific, but I want to encourage us to remember that we are all workers, and vocational awe is what makes us think that we are special and we need things just for us. There's actually a wealth of resources out there for worker organizing that are not specific to libraries that will still be incredibly valuable to you.
Okay. And of course, if anyone has suggestions for other resources, feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to be saving the chat for later. All right, and Jason Villani asks, what about a National Library Workers Union? Currently, the hodgepodge patchwork and uneven terrain of who is unionized and how is confusing and not equitable. I realize this is a huge logistical task, but just curious as to whether anyone is thinking about this. So, one big library union? Anyone? Would it work? Andrea is shaking her head.
Yeah, I think it sounds really idyllic, but I'm just going to say this I've interacted. I used to be a union organizer for AFSCME, and I've interacted with librarians before I became a librarian. Actually, librarians at AFSCME convinced me to be a librarian. So they're like, you're perfect for this, you should do it. Each library system has its own unique personality. I mean, I can speak for us. Philadelphia, we should not be with any other national union. Philly's Philly. Like, we want things a certain way. We want things to look a certain way. We want to make sure that we have our pretzels with spicy mustard at every union meeting and every meeting that we have. I think there needs to be some variety. I think there needs to be some national standards with the National Labor Board. in the Department of Labor, but I like the idea of actually being able to find a union that represents me, or like me and my coworkers, and that actually fits to our institution's personality and culture. So, I mean, it just doesn't sound that great to me, but because I want to have like my own kind of, I want to have a union that fits my workplace.
I'll agree with that. I mean, as everybody's union is different, everybody has different issues, everybody has different relationships with their administrator and the community. But if it would be something that would help, people engage more people, get more people to participate, that would be something encouraging. But it's hard to get people any more to kind of participate. So it would be like a bigger struggle. So it's a great idea, and if it would yield power, I would say it's a good thing. But concentrating power is something that we need to keep, and we need to grow and start growing just within our locals and everything. So.
Oh, and I want to go back to this, like, I keep being like, you're so great, Meredith, all the things you said. Back to what Meredith said about we're all workers. Y'all, there's the AFL-CIO. It is a huge conglomerate of unions, and they are national. If you're not sure what union you want to be, or if you just want to start something, I remember back in the day, like Uber and Lyft drivers weren't sure what union they wanted to be with or anything. So they just went to the AFL-CIO. So like, if you're not sure where you want to go, like, we're all workers. We don't need anything special. We're not special. Librarians are not special. Library workers are not special. If you want to form a union, go to the AFL-CIO. It's that easy.
And I'll add to that as well, realizing we're all workers and being part of a central labor council. Every state has a state AFL-CIO. Creating relationships with other trade unions, getting support from other trade unions, and being part of that conversation, educating them on your issues. A lot of the issues are the same with trade, could be this same issues with trade unions as well. And when they learn that public workers have the same issues, they're like, okay, so they embrace us more, and we think it's our responsibility as well to claim our space as workers with the other kind of worker unions. So those relationship building is just always going to be key, always going to be your rock, your go-to.
And everyone's a worker, so everyone is your coworker and fellow worker. Also Joe in the chat also wanted to shout out industrial workers of the world. So if we're going to boost the AFL-CIO, I guess we gotta give a shout out to the IWW as well. And it's our final minute. So I want to thank our wonderful audience for attending and for the great questions that you all put in the Q&A. This was great, and I love how everyone was contributed to the chat. We're going to save that for later and distribute it, hopefully. Thank you again to our wonderful panelists, Andrea, Michael, Meredith, and thanks to Todd and Rebecca for putting this together. And I think, will we have people's contact information, the panelists' contact information, or will we be able to share it with the attendees?
Panelists, are you okay with sharing contact info, either Twitter or email or whatever? Yep.
Okay, great. And this session was recorded, and it's going to be on YouTube, so you can share this with any of your colleagues who could not attend tonight. So thank you again, everyone.
And thank you, Michelle, for doing such a wonderful job moderating this evening. So
my pleasure.
Kudos to all. And thanks to everybody who joined. Educate, organize, and agitate. As the great Frederick Douglass reminds us, this was the last thing we said before we started this panel tonight, was power concedes nothing without a demand. So build this network and let's go. Everybody have a great night.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.